She mocked her husband for having no lawyer, until his mother walked in and shocked everyone in the courtroom. Look at him, Your Honor. Sitting there with no one. Not even a law intern wanted to defend this lost cause. Victoria's laughter echoed through courtroom 12 of the Atlanta Civil Court. She adjusted the pearl necklace on her neck and exchanged a knowing look with her lawyer, Preston Wells, one of the most feared names in family law in the southern United States. On the other side of the aisle, at the defense table, Derek sat alone. The chair beside him was empty. There were no folders, no stacked documents, no glasses of water. Just a black man of 34, with his hands clasped on the table, staring at the emptiness before him. Derek still wore his wedding ring. After 8 years of marriage, he couldn't bring himself to take it off. Mr. Thompson, Judge Morrison said, adjusting his glasses and looking at Derek with a mixture of pity and impatience. Are you aware that this court cannot wait indefinitely? Mrs. Thompson claims you cannot afford legal representation. Is that true? Derek opened his mouth to respond, but Victoria was faster. It's true, Your Honor. My husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband, doesn't have a cent. I supported that man for 8 years while he played entrepreneur. Every business he opened, I paid the bills. Every stupid dream he had, I financed. Preston Wells stood up, smoothing his silk tie. Your Honor, my client is being generous by offering Mr. Thompson the used car and $15,000 to start over. Considering that all assets were acquired with her salary as CFO of Whitmore and Associates, it's more than fair. Fair. Derek finally spoke. His voice was low, controlled. Victoria, you know that's not true. I know you never had the courage to be a real man. Victoria turned to face him, her eyes full of contempt. 8 years, Derek. 8 years waiting for you to become something. And what did I get? A husband who cooked and cleaned the house while I paid the bills. You were my maid, not my partner. Some spectators in the back of the room murmured. The bailiff cleared his throat uncomfortably. Derek closed his eyes for a moment. The words hurt more than he would ever admit. Not because they were true, but because they came from the woman he had loved unconditionally for almost a decade. What Victoria didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Derek wasn't there alone by accident. He was there alone by strategy. Mr. Thompson, Judge Morrison said, his patience clearly wearing thin. For the last time, do you or do you not have legal representation? Derek looked at the clock on the wall. 10:47. She was late. I do, Your Honor. My lawyer is on her way. Victoria let out a loud laugh. Lawyer? Derek, please. With what money? You scraped every last cent from the joint account to open that ridiculous coffee shop that failed in 6 months. The coffee shop didn't fail, Derek said calmly. You cut the funding in the 3rd month because you wanted to see me fail. I cut it because it was money down the drain. Like everything you touched. Preston Wells checked his watch. Your Honor, we're wasting time. I move for the court to proceed with a default judgment. The defendant clearly has no means to. The double doors of the courtroom burst open with a bang. Everyone turned. A woman entered. She appeared to be in her early 60s, but her posture was that of someone who commanded armies. She wore an impeccable white suit, custom-tailored, that probably cost more than Preston Wells's car. Her gray hair was pulled back in an elegant bun. Her eyes, the same brown eyes as Derek's, swept the room with laser precision. Behind her, 3 younger lawyers carried leather briefcases, walking in formation like soldiers. Preston Wells dropped his pen. No, he whispered. It can't be. Victoria frowned. Who is that? The woman walked down the center aisle, her heels echoing like a countdown. She didn't look at Victoria. She didn't look at Preston. She went straight to Derek's table and placed her hand on her son's shoulder. Sorry I'm late, dear, she said, her voice projecting throughout the room. Traffic from Washington was impossible. Then she turned to the judge and smiled, the kind of smile that precedes a controlled demolition. Your Honor, my name is Eleanor Thompson, senior partner at Thompson, Carter & Morrison in Washington, D.C. I am entering as defense counsel for my son. She paused, looking directly at Victoria. And I am also the woman this lady just called a maid. Let's see who cleans whose floor today. What no one in that room could imagine was that Eleanor Thompson wasn't just a lawyer. She was considered one of the 50 most influential women in American law. And she had just declared war. The silence that followed Eleanor Thompson's introduction was absolute. Preston Wells was paralyzed. His hands trembled slightly as he frantically leafed through the papers in front of him, as if searching for an emergency exit in a legal document. Victoria leaned in to whisper to her lawyer. "Preston, who is this woman? Why are you sweating?" Preston swallowed hard. "Eleanor Thompson," he murmured back. "She defended 3 Supreme Court justices in confirmation hearings. She destroyed senators' careers. She's called the executioner." Victoria paled, but quickly recomposed her expression. "I don't care who she is. The facts are on my side." Eleanor walked to the defense table and sat down next to Derek. She opened her briefcase and began organizing documents with surgical precision. Her 3 associates positioned themselves behind her like a silent wall. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice filling every corner of the room. "I apologize for the delay. I was finalizing some last-minute discoveries that I believe are relevant to this case." "Objection," Preston said, standing up. "Any new evidence should have been presented during the discovery phase. We cannot accept last-minute surprises." Eleanor smiled. "I completely agree, Mr. Wells. That's why this evidence isn't new. It always existed. Mrs. Thompson simply chose not to mention it in her financial declaration." She stood and handed a folder to the bailiff, who took it to the judge. "What is that?" Victoria asked, her voice losing some of its previous arrogance. "Your Honor, what you have in your hands is the complete record of my client's financial contributions to the marital estate over the 8 years of marriage." Judge Morrison began leafing through the documents. His eyebrows rose progressively. "Mrs. Thompson claims she supported my client," Eleanor continued. "That's technically true for the last 2 years. But in the 6 years before that, it was Derek who paid the down payment on the apartment in Buckhead. It was Derek who financed Mrs. Thompson's MBA at Emory University. It was Derek who covered the household expenses while she built her career." Victoria stood up. "That's a lie. He never had that money." "He didn't," Eleanor agreed. "Because he spent it all on you. $342,000, to be exact. I have the bank statements, the transfers, the university payment receipts." Derek remained silent, watching. He knew his mother. He knew this was just the warm-up. Preston Wells tried to regain control. "Your Honor, even if these allegations are true, that was years ago. The prenuptial agreement signed by Mr. Thompson." "Ah, yes. The prenuptial agreement," Eleanor interrupted, pulling another document from her briefcase. "Signed 3 days before the wedding, when my son was emotionally vulnerable after his father's death." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "My husband, Robert Thompson, died of a heart attack 1 week before the wedding." Derek was devastated. And it was at that moment that Mrs. Thompson presented a 20-page document and said that if he didn't sign it, the wedding would be cancelled. Derek closed his eyes. The memory still hurt. His father, his hero, his best friend, gone in an instant. And Victoria, at the funeral, whispering about protecting her assets. "That's emotional coercion," Eleanor declared. "And in the state of Georgia, it invalidates any prenuptial contract." Victoria was red. "I didn't force him to do anything. He signed because he wanted to." Eleanor turned to face her for the first time. The look she gave made Victoria involuntarily step back. "Mrs. Thompson, let me be clear. I've spent the last 3 months investigating every aspect of your marriage to my son. Every bank transaction. Every text message. Every corporate email." She tilted her head slightly. "Including the messages you exchanged with Mr. Richard Whitmore, your boss, over the last 18 months. Victoria's face lost all color. Preston Wells froze. "Your Honor, this is relevant," Judge Morrison completed, his eyes now fixed on Victoria with new intensity. "Continue, Mrs. Thompson." Eleanor turned back to the judge. "I reserve this evidence for the appropriate moment, Your Honor. For now, I request that the court deny the motion for default judgment and allow a full hearing on the division of assets." "Granted," Judge Morrison said without hesitation. "And Mrs. Victoria Thompson, I strongly suggest you reconsider the posture you've adopted in this court." Victoria looked at Derek. For the first time in years, she saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was patience. The patience of someone who knows exactly what's coming. And what Victoria couldn't imagine was that the messages with Richard Whitmore were just the tip of an iceberg that was about to sink not only her marriage, but her entire career. Judge Morrison called a 30-minute recess before resuming the hearing. When everyone returned to their seats, the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Victoria was paler. Her eyes darted between Preston Wells and the door, as if calculating her chances of escape. Preston, in turn, had lost all arrogance. He leafed through documents nervously, avoiding looking at Eleanor Thompson. Derek remained calm. His mother had told him to trust the process. And he trusted. "We may proceed," Judge Morrison announced. Mrs. Thompson, the lawyer, mentioned additional evidence. "I am prepared to hear it." Eleanor stood up. This time, there was no smile on her face. Just the concentrated expression of a surgeon about to make a precise incision. "Your Honor, over the past 3 months, my team conducted a detailed investigation into the Thompson couple's finances. What we discovered was disturbing." She gestured to one of her associates, who connected a laptop to the court's projection system. An image appeared on the screen, an email exchange. "This is an email sent by Mrs. Victoria Thompson to Mr. Richard Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore & Associates, in March of this year." Victoria stood up. "Objection. This is privileged communication between—" "Sit down, Mrs. Thompson," Judge Morrison ordered. "You are not a lawyer. You cannot make objections." Preston Wells tried. "Your Honor, corporate communications are protected." "Not when they involve fraud," Eleanor cut in. "And not when they were sent from Mrs. Thompson's personal email, not corporate." Judge Morrison gestured for her to continue. Eleanor read aloud, "Richard, the plan is working. Derek doesn't suspect anything. When the divorce is finalized, I'll have access to his trust fund without raising suspicions. We can use the money for the Singapore expansion. Love you. V." The murmur in the room was immediate. Derek felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Trust fund? What trust fund? Eleanor placed her hand on her son's shoulder, a silent gesture of support. Then she turned to the court. "My son didn't know, Your Honor. And that was the cruelest part of all this." She walked to the center of the room. "When my husband Robert passed away 8 years ago, he left a trust fund worth $1,200,000 for Derek. The money was scheduled to be released when Derek turned 35, which will happen in 7 months." Derek looked at his mother, shocked. He didn't know about any trust fund. "Robert wanted it to be a surprise," Eleanor explained, her voice softening for a moment. "He wanted Derek to have financial security when he was more mature. He never imagined that." She stopped, composing herself. "Mrs. Victoria Thompson discovered the trust fund 2 years ago, when she illegally accessed our family office files. Since then, she planned this divorce to coincide with the release of the funds." Eleanor projected another document on the screen. "This is the divorce agreement that Mrs. Thompson intended for my son to sign. In Clause 14, Section B, in small print, it states that any inheritances or trust funds received within 1 year after the finalization of the divorce shall be considered marital assets to be divided equally." Judge Morrison tore the glasses from his face. She was trying to steal an inheritance he didn't even know existed. "Exactly, Your Honor." Victoria finally exploded. "This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. I supported that man for years." "You supported my son for 2 years, Eleanor corrected coldly. "After he spent all his savings paying for your education and your career. And during those 2 years, you were having an affair with your boss and planning to steal my son's inheritance." She turned to Preston Wells. "And as for you, Mr. Wells, did you know your client intended to commit fraud? Or were you just negligent in not reading the agreement she drafted herself?" Preston was green. I had no knowledge." "Your Honor," Eleanor continued, "I have here records of bank transfers showing that Mrs. Thompson diverted $43,000 from the couple's joint account to a personal account in the Bahamas over the last 18 months. I also have hotel records showing that she and Mr. Whitmore spent 12 weekends together at resorts during the same period, all paid with money from the joint account. She placed a stack of documents on the judge's desk. And I have a sworn statement from the IT department of Whitmore and Associates confirming that Mrs. Thompson accessed confidential files about the Thompson Trust Fund using corporate credentials, which constitutes a security breach and potentially a federal crime. Victoria began to cry. Derek, please. I can explain. We can work this out. Derek looked at her. For 8 years, he had loved this woman. He had sacrificed his dreams for hers. He had believed their love was real. But now, seeing her there, the fake tears, the desperate manipulation, he finally understood. You never loved me, Derek said, his voice surprisingly steady. I was an investment. A long-term plan. No, Derek, You knew my father had left that money. You knew from the beginning, didn't you? That's why you agreed to marry me. That's why you insisted on the prenup at his funeral. Victoria didn't respond. Her silence was the only confession Derek needed. Preston Wells stood up abruptly. Your Honor, I request permission to withdraw as counsel for the plaintiff. An ethical conflict has arisen that makes it impossible for me to continue on this case. Denied for now, Judge Morrison said. You will stay exactly where you are until I finish processing all of this. He turned to Victoria. Mrs. Thompson, based on the evidence presented, I am inclined not only to deny all your requests, but also to forward this case to the district attorney for investigation of fraud, trust violation, and possible conspiracy. Victoria collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Eleanor Thompson remained standing, unshaken. Your Honor, my client does not seek revenge. He seeks justice. And justice in this case means that Mrs. Victoria Thompson should leave this marriage exactly the same way she planned to leave my son. She paused dramatically. With nothing. What no one in the room could predict was that Victoria Thompson's destruction in that courtroom would be just the beginning. Because when Eleanor mentioned the illegally accessed corporate files, she had planted a seed that would grow until it brought down not just a fraudulent marriage, but an entire corruption scheme that would reach the highest levels of Whitmore and Associates. Judge Morrison removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. In 23 years on the bench, he had seen everything, but he had rarely witnessed such complete and deserved destruction. Very well, he said, his grave voice filling the silence. I am prepared to issue my preliminary ruling. Victoria raised her head, her eyes swollen from crying. Preston Wells didn't even bother pretending he still represented her. He was busy typing frantically on his phone, probably alerting his firm about the impending disaster. First, the prenuptial agreement presented by the plaintiff is voided. The evidence of emotional coercion during the defendant's mourning period is clear and unequivocal. Derek felt a weight lift from his shoulders. That document had been an invisible chain around his neck for 8 years. Second, based on the evidence of financial fraud, diversion of marital funds, and attempted misappropriation of inheritance, I determine that all of the couple's assets shall be evaluated and divided with a ratio of 70% for the defendant and 30% for the plaintiff. Victoria let out a groan. 70%? That's not fair. Mrs. Thompson, the judge said coldly, considering that you attempted to steal $1,200,000 from your own husband, you should be grateful I'm not awarding him 100%. And I'm not finished. He consulted his notes. Third, I am forwarding all evidence presented today to the FBI for investigation of wire fraud and violation of corporate information systems. You can expect a visit from federal agents soon. Preston Wells closed his briefcase and stood up. Your Honor, with your permission, I need to withdraw immediately. Permission granted. And Mr. Wells? I suggest you also hire a lawyer. The court will investigate how much you knew about your client's fraudulent intentions. Preston practically ran out of the room. Eleanor Thompson remained serene throughout the pronouncement. When the judge finished, she stood up. Your Honor, on behalf of my client, I thank you for the justice applied today. Derek Thompson is a man of integrity who was systematically manipulated and humiliated by someone who should have protected him. He did not come to this court seeking revenge, only the truth. She looked at Derek with a pride he hadn't seen in years. And the truth finally prevailed. 6 months later, Derek stood on the sidewalk, looking at the facade of the small cafe he had just renovated. The sign read Thompson's in gold letters on a dark green background. The aroma of fresh coffee wafted through the open door. His mother appeared beside him, holding 2 steaming cups. "Your father would be proud," Eleanor said, handing him a cup. Derek smiled, accepting the coffee. "You think so?" "I'm certain. He always said you had a talent for making people feel at home. This place is proof of that." The cafe had opened 3 weeks ago and was already a success. The combination of welcoming atmosphere, original recipes, and the owner's story of overcoming adversity had attracted local media attention. A reporter had done a story titled "From Courtroom to Entrepreneur," the story of the man who refused to be a victim. Derek had finally removed his wedding ring. In its place, he wore his father's watch, a simple piece that Robert Thompson had worn every day of his adult life. Eleanor had kept the watch for years, waiting for the right moment to return it. "And what about Victoria?" Derek asked, though he already knew the answer. Eleanor took a sip of coffee before responding. "The FBI concluded its investigation last week. She and Richard Whitmore were indicted for corporate fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. Apparently, the trust fund scheme was just a small part of a much larger operation." Derek shook his head. "She always wanted to be rich. I guess she found a shortcut." "A shortcut to federal prison," Eleanor corrected. "Sentencing should come next month. Her lawyers are trying to make a deal, but the prosecutor doesn't seem interested in negotiating." Whitmore and Associates had collapsed 2 months after the trial. When investigations began, dozens of irregularities came to light. Richard Whitmore lost everything: the company, his reputation, his freedom. Victoria, who had dreamed of being a mogul's wife, ended up being a criminal's accomplice. Derek felt no satisfaction in her downfall. Just a distant emptiness, like looking at an old photo of someone you thought you knew. "Mom," he said, turning to Eleanor. "Why did you never tell me about the trust fund? Why did Dad want it to be a secret?" Eleanor sighed. "Your father was afraid the money would change you. He grew up poor, built everything from scratch, and wanted you to have the same experience. He used to say that money given too early creates weak men, but money given at the right time creates wise men." She placed her hand on her son's face. "He would have turned 65 yesterday. And I know with absolute certainty that he's looking at you right now with the same pride I feel." Derek hugged his mother. It was a tight, lingering embrace, the kind of hug he should have given more often over the years. "Thank you," he whispered. "For everything. For walking through those courtroom doors. For fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself." Eleanor stepped back, discreetly wiping away a tear. "You're my son, Derek. There is no force in the world that would stop me from protecting you." 1 year after the trial, Derek received a letter. It was from Victoria. Handwritten, on prison paper. He almost threw it away without reading. But something made him stop. The letter was short. "Derek, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that at some point, maybe in the beginning, maybe before I completely lost myself, I really did love you. You were the best part of my life, and I destroyed it out of greed. You deserved someone better. I hope you find her. Victoria." Derek folded the letter and put it in his pocket. He wouldn't respond. There was nothing to say. But that night, when he closed the cafe and walked through the streets of Atlanta under the city lights, he realized something important. He no longer felt anger. He no longer felt pain. He only felt peace. Victoria had tried to destroy him. She had mocked him in court, called him a failure, planned to steal his inheritance. She thought that because he was kind, he was weak. She thought that because he was patient, he was foolish. But Derek had learned the truth his father had always tried to teach. Strength isn't about shouting louder or attacking first. Strength is about maintaining your integrity when everything around you falls apart. He walked past the courthouse where it had all happened. The same double doors through which his mother had entered like a force of nature. Derek smiled to himself. Victoria had mocked him for not having a lawyer. She didn't count on the fact that her mother-in-law was one of the most powerful women in American law. She didn't count on Derek spending months silently gathering evidence. She didn't count on the man she called a maid, having a family willing to move mountains for him. The best revenge wasn't destroying Victoria. The best revenge was building a life she could never touch. Derek opened the door to his apartment, a new place, just his, decorated with paintings he had made himself during therapy. He made some tea, sat on the balcony, and looked at the stars. Tomorrow would be another day. Another coffee to brew. More customers to welcome. Another page in the story he finally had the freedom to write. And for the first time in almost a decade, Derek Thompson slept in peace. The moral of this story is simple: never confuse kindness with weakness. Derek was humiliated, betrayed, and robbed by someone who swore to love him. But he didn't let himself be destroyed. He waited, gathered his strength, and let the truth do the dirty work. Victoria wanted everything and ended up with nothing. Derek wanted only justice and found much more. He found himself. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who found out too late who you really were? Remember, the people who mock you today may be the same ones who will beg for your attention tomorrow. The difference is that you won't be available anymore.